Welcome to the Ardan Labs Podcast. Our special guest today is Mike Elgan. Mike, thanks for hanging out with us today.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Give everybody the 2-minute spiel on what you're doing today. But remember, don't go crazy because I'm going to put you in the time machine a little bit. So just focus on like what you're doing today.
I'm a professional editorialist. I write editorial, opinion columns. I've been doing it for decades, and I've done a variety of other things as well for decades. But that's mainly what I do now. I have a newsletter, and I write for computer publications.
I was going to ask you like opinions on computer stuff.
Yes, mostly nowadays, artificial intelligence, augmented reality. Sort of the bleeding edge of technology, even into physical AI with robotics training, stuff like that. I don't write it from an engineer's perspective. I write it for kind of like technical people who are specialists in other fields. So I'm like the Scientific American approach where my audience is technology professionals, but it's like I'm explaining, AI to developers, or I'm explaining, augmented reality to people who do business, cybersecurity stuff. So that's kind of my approach.
That's pretty cool. Where's your stuff being published today?
I've been writing on Computer World for 20 years or something like that, and I have a newsletter called Machine Society, which is a lot of fun. Machinesociety.ai. So I publish a lot of my opinion columns there. I also have a podcast, and I'll write for this publication or that publication from time to time. But it's mostly Computer World and Machine Society.
Man, it's gonna be a good show. I'm really interested in how you got to that. I wrote before we jump in the time machine. I've written 2 books and like well over 100 blog posts, and I am like burnt out from writing, man. I have like, the only thing I can think about is like almost a level of trauma that if I even think about sitting down to write something, even a blog post, I get like this, man. But you've been doing this for a long time, right? Like
Yes.
That hasn't happened to you. You still enjoy writing.
I love it. And, a lot of it is just personality. Like I have a bent and warped personality that leads me to just want to do that. And most people don't. And in fact, podcasting is like, that's the best thing. Like if you want to communicate to people, I think right now podcasting is as good as it gets. You get to have interesting conversations. You get to be, natural. You don't have to put on a big show. And you're not sitting there, sort of grinding through the minutia of, putting, writing books. I have written one book. I'm working on 2 more right now, and I know what you mean about the books. I mean that's really tough for me as a columnist and a journalist. I've been a journalist. I've been writing for newspapers for a couple of years, then magazines since the late 80s. And for me, I can churn out a 1,200 word article that is very comfortable for me. But a book length thing, I always want to finish it and publish it. My instinct is always to sort of make it a column. So that's a little tougher for me. But I know what you mean. It's brutal. It's like you're waterboarding yourself to a certain extent.
Oh yeah, it's tough. The amount of time and effort you got to put into getting a book done. But I think the other thing that for me personally is because I do a lot of teaching. I've learned over the years that if I don't write it down first, try to figure out what the words are, I'm not going to be an effective communicator teaching it later. Like it's easy to just throw words around, but when you sit and write something, the context is always missing, right? So you've always got to have context leading everything you're doing. And then I think that helps you get on a podcast or get in front of a classroom and be able to teach it more effectively. You have to write it, no matter what. I think you just got to write it down at some level.
The act of writing is the visible part of an iceberg, and below that part is everybody's context. Is being able to place yourself in the shoes of somebody who doesn't have an intuition about the subject matter, who doesn't have any background or information, to know a lot about a subject, and then to empathize with somebody who doesn't know much about it. Is very difficult, and it's something that requires a ton of practice and failure and then trying again type of thing. And it's people have different ideas about how the world works and so on. You got to take all that into consideration. So there's a lot more to it than just conveying what you know to somebody.
I love the way you said that. I'm gonna have Kevin give me a transcription of everything you just said, because that's exactly it in like 3 sentences. All right, we're gonna jump in the time machine now. So a couple of questions. First one is, gotta age you now. Like, what year did you graduate high school, and where were you on the planet?
I graduated a year early in Carpinteria, California, which is just a little town south of Santa Barbara, California. And that town pops up again in my career a couple more times, oddly enough. But yeah, I grew up. It's a little beach town. I grew up surfing and just kind of being a terrible student.
And what
I, gr-
year?
I
What
grad.
year?
I was in the class of 1980, and I left in 1979.
Okay, 1980. And everybody's listening to the podcast knows I graduated in 87. I just always, just to get a sense of where everybody is. But the 80s are, yeah. I always find it interesting as I get older that I was born in the 60s. I was born in 69. And kind of had my childhood in the 70s and the 80s, because that was a real special time, I think.
But yeah,
I just felt like there was a lot more freedom for kids, not just be outside, but to even get into a little bit of trouble. Like
our parents were wonderfully neglectful.
At some level, right? Just get out of the house. I don't want to
Yes.
see you till the end of the day.
Be
And
home in time for dinner, and what you do in the meantime, and we'd be off breaking the law, endangering our lives, doing all kinds of stuff. And
you're miles away from the house.
yeah.
But the cops at the time were not trying to put you in jail. They were trying to get you back home. There was a sense of, I think, more community. And I don't think the world was any better or worse in the 70s and the 80s, looking at like crime and stuff today. I've got a book. My wife got me a book from a Notre Dame paper articles all the way back from 1929. And they're news articles from South Bend, and you're supposed to read about all the football stuff. But there are articles about this person shooting that person, and I'm reading all this, and my brain's going, if I gave you this article today, you'd think it was yesterday. Like, I don't think the world was any better or worse in the 70s or 80s, but for some reason,
Yeah, I think in the 70s and 80s, statistically, I think homicide was worse, and I think it got way better in the 90s, and then sort of there was a little spike, and then it's been declining since. Kids today live in a safer world than the world we grew up in. What's different is the information space. So we know way too much about all the bad stuff that's happening, and we know it all day, every day. And so it's like we're kind of like, we're always in a state of stress and fear because we know all the things that are happening. But back in the 70s and 80s, nobody knew anything. Like, there was no internet. There was no web, at least.
you had news for half an hour. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was all sanitized, and it was all kind of presented in a way that made it sound like the world was sane, and like somebody was in control of it all, and it was all very reassuring. But the reality was that kids today live in a much safer world. Like, one of the things that's different is, as we were just alluding, we would run feral, through the streets, and nobody cared. And then now, kids have to wear a helmet. They can't go out, beyond the front yard, whatever, because parents are afraid they're going to get kidnapped, right? The chances that you would get kidnapped by some psycho when we were kids is way higher than it is now. And yet nobody worried about it then, and everybody worries about it now. So what's changed is our fear and our stress level about what's possible.
Yeah, but like I had 5 kids in my first marriage, and first kid was born in 96. And I lived in a gated community, which I think is still silly, because I think the only thing you're doing is just all the crime still happens inside. It doesn't really happen outside.
Yeah.
I took the same approach. I told them to go outside, ride your bikes. You had access to this whole world. And I made them sort of grow up. They didn't have as much freedom as I did, right? Like, I could go 2-3 miles away. Maybe they had a half a mile, but that kind of stuck with me. And now I've got kids that are about to start having kids. I got 2 kids that are pregnant, and it's just going to be interesting as a grandfather to see how much control they put on these kids, because I want them to have freedom already. and it ain't born yet.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you this. I have one grandchild, and it's the best. So you're going to love it. And no matter what else, I'm sure that you're going to just absolutely love having grandkids.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm ready for that. Like, I'm not mad, sad, upset. Call me Grandpa Bill all day long. Like I think I'm kind of ready for that. All right, let's talk about high school for a minute. What kind of things were you interested in those 4 sort of years leading up to 1980? There, what were you doing every day? What was your thing?
I was mostly surfing, and I was a band geek, so I was in the band, and I was
What
like a
instrument?
trumpet,
Nice.
and I was and I played that instrument because that's the one we had around the house when I was a kid and needed to join the band. So, and I had some very smart friends. We were kind of ahead of our time in terms of learning about stuff, caring about stuff. I was a terrible student in science and mathematics and all the things that would lead to engineering or technology or any of that stuff. I just didn't click with school at all. So I just tolerated school, and then my real life was kind of after school. So, but that was that. And interestingly enough, the subject that I was worst at was English. So
Hmm.
I was in the most remedial classes in English because I just didn't get it. I was reading all the time, and interested in, but I just couldn't get interested in the subject matter the way it was taught. And uh, the more the more I was sort of held back in that subject, the less engaged I was in it. And so it was just this recurring sort of like self-reinforcing failure trajectory for language.
It sounds like me, man. I was not a good student. The teachers would help me get a C because I always have. I've looked back on it now as a level of immaturity. I just think I was just so immature at the time I was going to school, and my mom started me in school a year early because I'm Irish twin with my sister, and she's an Irish twin with hers. My next sister, my mom didn't want us in the same grade, basically, right? And I always sort of just took it as I was just super immature, and I just wasn't. I couldn't get focused. It sounds like the same thing, right? Like if I can go back now and sort of do it again, right? I think I would do much better in terms of
Oh yeah, can you
yeah,
imagine?
right. No, no, I can't imagine, right? But that is what that is, right? So the surfing's interesting because I grew up in New York. Like we didn't do the surfing thing. In fact, it was only recently somebody told me, I don't remember where we were in California, that there's a lot of times you have coral under the ocean where you're surfing.
Yeah,
Is that
especially
like
in Hawaii
true?
and in South Pacific. There are certain places where that's the case. There are other hazards in California where I went surfing, and coral was not an issue at all. But that's super dangerous because oftentimes the surf spots, including in Hawaii, it's the coral that makes the waves so good because it kind of pushes the water up. And so you're kind of surfing in large waves, and there's just 3, 4, 5 feet of water, and below that is sharp coral. So it's really kind of you don't want to get slammed into it
No,
from a
that's
big wave.
like razor blades, right? Like
Yes, yes,
that was
very
insane to me
dangerous.
when somebody told me that. I was like, why
Yeah,
would you do that? Like you're
right.
gonna wipe out at least once.
Yeah, and in California, I mean, we happen to have two fairly gentle surf spots that I had access to. Rincon, which is mentioned in a Beach Boys song, you might be familiar with that, and Tar Pits was called, and those are both very, in the summer, unless it was like a big swell in the winter, it was, pretty gentle, pretty safe. And then later on, when I was much older, would surf in the Santa Cruz area, and that whole area, Half Moon Bay, Santa Cruz, Mavericks, brutal stuff. Not because of coral, but just because the sheer power and size of the waves, plus the depth of the water, the temperature of the water, there's kelp everywhere, which you can sort of get tangled in, and tons of other surfers, which is the most dangerous thing of all. But like the risk for a place like Santa Cruz on a big day is you can get caught inside, which means where you don't have the oxygen in your lungs to hold your breath to go under a big wave that's coming, and you don't and if you try to go in, it's like you'll be caught in the wrong part of the wave, and it'll just lay waste to you and then dash you on the rocks. So you're kind of stuck in this place where you just your survival depends on catching your breath, and the waves won't let you. So that's the biggest danger in a place like that. And then there's of course Mavericks, which is a famous surf spot that when it's big, it's just monstrously big. A single wave will have 300 swimming pools full of water just coming at you, and it's just I would never.
Have you done any of that? Have you
No,
gotten
no,
on
no.
anything that's like anything
No.
big? No.
I never did big wave surfing. I always did like kind of gentle, fun surfing. Head high would be my, give or take half a body length would be my happy place.
No, that's cool. My other problem too is the water is too cold for me. Even in Miami, till the water gets to about 75 degrees, I don't want to go in it. I mean, I get the wetsuit. I've never worn a wetsuit, to be honest
Yeah.
with you. So I don't even know how much that even helps.
It helps a lot, but when I was growing up in high school, nobody, some people had wetsuits, but I didn't, just because it was expensive and I couldn't afford one, and so we would just, acquire this massive tolerance for ice cold water, because really the best waves are in the winter, and the water is very cold in California. It comes directly from Alaska. This is like subduction zone, like ice water, and
is that why it's so cold? Because
that's why it's so cold.
Alaska?
The water in general in the Pacific Ocean goes clockwise. And so I've surfed and swam my whole life all up and down the Pacific coast. And in, Northern California, it's just freezing cold. In Southern California, it's pretty cold most of the time.
Yeah,
You get down to Rosarito and Mexico and Baja, it gets more tolerable. One of the places I go a lot now is Oaxaca. Oaxaca has a beach area called Puerto Escondido, and there's a surf spot there as well. And the water is like warm, like it's nice. It's very pleasant. And then we also go to El Salvador, and the water is like actually too warm. It's
like Miami, probably.
Even more so. No, it's like a bathtub. It's like if it's a hot day, it's not refreshing to go in the water. It's great at night. Like you can go swimming at night in El Salvador, and if there's a little chill in the air, maybe it's wonderful. But like during the day on a hot sunny day, you got to find
Miami. It could get as high as 80. But that's what I need, dude. I can't be in that cold.
Yeah. Water's really nice in Miami too. It's like really nice, clear blue water. Oftentimes white sand beaches. Sometimes. So that's really nice. It's not like that in California. Is never like that. It's like brown sand and sort of kelpy and messy. So if you're just like into like playing around with the water, Miami's just so much nicer.
Was there, again, I grew up on the East Coast. One last question here, but was there pressure to surf when you were a kid in California?
Not really. I mean, my town was a little bit weird because it's definitely a beach town, and the two major activities for young people was surfing and football. So it was such a football town that was almost like a Texas football town. Like the amount of energy around the football team in high school was massive, and they were, I was big-ish, and so they were always dying to get me on the football team, which my mother would never let me do because it was dangerous. And so it was like surfers and football players, and never the twain shall. And it was also very agricultural, right? So there's a lot of big farms and old farming families and stuff like that. So that was the only sort of thing, but it was so common. There's so many. Everybody was a skater and a surfer and that sort of thing, that it was just, that was just what people did.
Because even in New York, I was like under 5 foot. I probably weighed 100 pounds wet in high school. And I felt pressure to be on the football team. My mom wouldn't let me play either. Yeah. So it probably saved my life there. But
they want you. They want you, it was like, I just had to explain it. And they really wanted my brother, because he was like super athletic and fast. He was on the track team. So he's like super fast. And they just were dying to get him on that. He would have been a great football player, but our family was just like, no way. I had a stepfather who had like permanent injuries from high school football and stuff like that. So that was a no-go for us.
So now that you're going to graduate high school, like it's the 1980s, um, your grades are okay, right? You got enough to
No,
graduate high school,
they
right?
were terrible. I took an equivalency exam. That's the only way I would have graduated, right? But I took it to get out a little early because I wanted to
Okay.
be a sound engineer. I wanted to do sound mixing in the music industry. And
Where did
so,
that come from? The band stuff?
yeah,
And being
the
in a band?
band and plus I was with a small group of friends. We're super into heavy metal and rock. I had a friend who's a great drummer, and he was actually in a really, really great band where the other two members of the band were, full on adults, and he was a high school kid who was just an amazing drummer. And so he would play literally at the Whiskey a Go Go and stuff like that. And I would go with them, and we were like hanging out in like music clubs in LA,
Nice.
and fake IDs to get in and all that stuff. And so I was always around musicians, and I just thought, well, that's what I want to do. I don't want to be a musician. I want to like mix music, and I want to put it together. And so I actually wrote a physical letter. This is again dating myself to literally every recording studio in Los Angeles. I found a complete list of all the studios with their addresses, and I sent a
Wow.
letter. And one of them replied and wanted to interview me, and they hired me. So I was like a gopher at a recording studio at the age of 17. And I got an apartment, lived alone, didn't even have roommates.
I was just going to ask you that. Did they pay you enough to have a place?
My rent was $250 a month. And it was a crap place in Pasadena. And I was living on, burritos and ramen and stuff like that. But yeah, I
What did your
paid my own
parents
way.
say when you said, kind of dropping out of high school, I'll take the equivalency exam and I'm going to go to Pasadena and go work?
They thought it was great. Like that, it was kind of like my mother's view was that's kind of a tradition in our family. We leave the house early, and she was very much in favor of me leaving the house. And so yeah, and I did that for a year, and it took me like a bunch of months before I realized, wait a minute, if I want to do sound engineering, I need an education, and I forgot that
Mm,
part. So after a year of doing that, I decided to go to school.
okay. So what's the options for school if you want to focus on that? Is it a traditional 4-year university at the time, or they had tech schools for that?
Here at Ardan Labs, we believe in empowering companies to reach their full potential through innovative technology solutions. Trusted by small startups and Fortune 500 companies alike, we specialize in high-performance software consulting, training, staffing, development, and now AI. With over 14 years of experience, Ardan Labs has trained over 30,000 engineers and served over 1,000 companies worldwide. Whether you're mastering Go, Rust, Kubernetes, Terraform, or blockchain, we're your strategic partner for performance-grade solutions. Let's elevate your tech journey together. Reach out to Ardan Labs today.
So it's a bit of an odd story. So first of all, my high school grades were terrible. I mean, just really horrible. Not college trajectory stuff at all. I had, we talked about parental neglect. My parents had no inclination to help me in any way, and so I really had no clue about how to go to school or how to apply for school or how to do anything. Like I really had no idea at all. But what I did know was that I was fortunate to live in California, where the school system is actually the school system is or was really great. So what I did is I just went to like a city college, right? I just enrolled at a city college. They'll take anybody basically. And then what I did was I transferred from the city college to UCSB, and then I transferred from UCSB to UCLA. So I just had to have the academic wherewithal to meet the requirements for transfer within the university system. And what was interesting about this is I was learning on the fly to how to be a student for the first time. And I was really, my only advantage was extreme enthusiasm for education. Like I was surrounded by all these idiots who just wanted to party and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, working full time and going to school full time, and just really motivated to learn. And it took me like 6 months to a year to drop the whole engineering thing. I realized that wasn't what I was truly interested in. And what I fell in love with was political science, and I sort of started getting into political science. But by the time I graduated from university, I was a killer student. Like I was getting straight A's. So I just kind of learned, on the fly while I was in college.
You know, I'm always saying, once a kid figures out what they want to do, it tends to take care of itself. Like my girls, first three girls, they figured out in high school what they wanted to do. They all changed like you did in college, but they they knew what they wanted to do and they pursued it. Like I had no issues with them. It took my boys to get to the age of 21 to figure out what they wanted to do. So between 17 and 21, it was a nightmare, because when you don't know what you want to do, all you're doing is anything else, right? And it seems like it's the same thing. You figured out what you wanted to do, and then you got really sort of focused and figured out how to make that happen.
What was funny though is that I was so repelled by school in high school and so excited by school in university. I loved it so much that I just kept going year after year, and I was trying to not graduate. I just wanted to be a student. That's basically that's the main thing I wanted to do. And then at some point they brought me into the only time I was ever sort of summoned to the administration building. They brought me in and they said, "Look, you have too many credits. If you don't graduate, we're gonna kick you out of school." So I'm like, okay, I guess I have to take the freshman courses that I've been avoiding. So and
Yeah,
then
you
my
were
last
missing.
year, I took all the one-on-one courses, right? Because I didn't take them. I was just taking classes that I was interested in. I took Japanese language for 3 years. I took all these other courses that I was just fascinating. It was like a candy shop for me, like all these classes that I wanted to take. So I did that, barely graduate, barely got all the freshman courses out of the way in time to graduate, and so I graduated.
See,
And
that's
so,
super interesting, right? Because really, ideally, take as many classes as you want. You're paying for them. But I guess they
y-
sat you down and said, finish the requirements.
well, you say you're paying for them. This is the UC system back in the 80s. Really, the taxpayers of California were paying for them.
Oh.
My annual tuition back then was, it's like $2,000 or something like that. It was nothing.
But you're still working in that studio the whole time that
No,
you're
no, no, no. I quit that job to go back to Santa Barbara to go to City
okay.
College, and then I went to UCSB, and all that time I was working as a cook or a waiter in restaurants. I've been working since I was 13, so I've always worked. And I actually got a job at the age of 15 by a fluke, by an accident. Like it was a restaurant, and I went there to get a job as a dishwasher, and the same night there was a new dishwasher starting, me, and then there was another guy starting as a cook, and that who they had hired. And I looked really old. And when I got there, the person who interviewed and hired me wasn't there. He was the manager of the restaurant or whatever. And so the people who got there assumed I was the cook because I looked older than the punk that
Wow.
they hired for the dishwasher. So they just threw me behind the line. By the time they figured out what's going on, I was doing the job well. And so I was like literally a cook in a restaurant at the age of 15. And so after that, I could parlay that into other cook jobs. And then eventually I did waiter jobs. And the restaurant industry was great for students.
Yeah, it
Um,
is. It's
uh,
flexible. You make good money.
Free food. It's
Free food.
yeah, it was a great job, and I was very lucky. And so
But you
that's what
didn't
I
move
did.
back in with your parents, though, right? You got your own place, so you moved back in.
When I moved from LA after the recordings gig, I moved in with my parents for a few months, got it, and then I got an apartment in the city of Santa Barbara, and I lived with various roommates throughout that time. So yeah, just
Yeah, it's hard to
temporarily.
move back in once you've been on your own. I told every kid that when they went off to college. I go, you're never gonna want to be back here. What are you gonna do to my room? I go, it's not your room anymore. I
Yeah,
promise you, you're not gonna want it.
yeah.
It's
I got
really
news for you. It
hard.
never was your room. I pay the rent. I pay the mortgage here. No, but it's I never wanted to. I always had money. I always had a job, and I've always been very independent. So I never had any interest in living with my parents.
So what year is it when they finally sit you down and say, You need a degree, son. Just get these classes done.
So that was 87. So basically I went back to school in, I think, 81, and I took a year off to travel, came back and sort of dragged it out and so on. I think it took me 5.5 years to complete my 4-year degree, plus a year traveling. So it's pretty late. I think, I was, I don't know, I was older than other kids graduating by 3 years. And so, so it's like 87. And at the time I wanted to be a diplomat. I wanted to work for the U.S. Foreign Service, but then that's tough. That's a
wait
tough
a
gig.
second. Wait a second. So you're like 27, 28. It's 1987.
Yeah, I'm 20, 24, 25, something like that.
Oh, 24, 25.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, because you graduated a year earlier. So
Right.
8 years. Okay. You're 24, 25. You just finished your degree. It's 1987. I was just graduating high school, so I don't have a sense of, I know in 1992 and 93, the economy was really bad because I couldn't get a job out of uni. You got this. What's your degree in anyway?
Political science.
In political science. So
political science
started,
with an international relations emphasis.
What was attractive what was attracting you to that? Was it the debate? Was it the history?
All of that. So what I was attracted by was it happened immediately when I went, because I was taking like history and I thought that was great, and I was taking all these other courses, and some courses were too kind of technical for my taste, and others were not technical enough for my taste. So there were a bunch of coursework that were a little bit mushy for me, and I found the culture of those disciplines to be not really in tune with my attitude. And then when I went to UCLA and took my first political science course, I'm like, okay, these are my people, because they're like super serious. They're super into history. They know what's happening in the world. Like they know how to argue. And I just thought these people are awesome. They're so like, they're kind of hardcore. They were a little intimidating, right? Because there was all these students and grad students, and I started taking all these I guess they'd call them survey courses, where the classroom was essentially a conference room with 6 students in it, and you'd write papers and stuff like that. I loved it so much, and I was encountering all these really interesting people. So like, I took a course on Central American politics, and one of the guys in the class was like a former, like, I don't know, politician from Nicaragua or something like that. And so I was just like, this is great. I loved it. And so that was really my interest. And I thought, I just want to do politics. That's what I thought I wanted to do.
See,
college.
But when I hear politics, I think you want to become a senator. Are you looking like, right? So in my ignorance, right, when I hear somebody's going into politics, I think because they want to run for office. But what were you sort of thinking about?
I wanted to be a diplomat. I wanted to be like a political analyst stationed in Israel or in Tokyo, just doing academia for to generate intelligence for the U.S. government, like that kind of thing. And so I'll tell you what would have happened. My natural trajectory would have been, because I was super into journalism at that time, newspaper journalism, like as a consumer, right? I subscribed to the New York Times when I was, 20 something, and would devour it. I was subscribed to all the news magazines, stuff like that. I had a family very early. So while I was in college, I started having a family. And so I'm working full time, had a family, and was going to school full time. It was pretty intense. But had I not had the family, had I not met my wife, I'm fairly certain that what my trajectory would have been was I would have been a war correspondent, because I was really sort of super interested in travel, still am, super interested in war and current events and stuff like that, and super interested in journalism. So that wasn't an option because I was a family person, but that's what I would have done had I not had a family.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it sounds exciting, right? I want to be in the middle of actual history, and I want to be reporting the actual history that's happening, that 100 years from now people are going to read, and I want those words to be mine at some level.
Yeah. And I wanted to be in those places. Like I was always attracted to movies that depicted people in faraway places with a little danger around and sort of being involved in things a bit. And sort of like, I was always super, super attracted to like, there was a Mel Gibson movie called The Year of Living Dangerously, where Mel Gibson was covering the, sort of the revolution in Indonesia and all this kind of stuff. And you call in the story over the phone, and you call the editor to read the story to them, and they're typing it up, and they're putting in I thought that's the best thing I've ever seen. I totally want to do that, and so I probably would have done something like that.
Interesting. So then, what did you end up doing? What was your first sort of gig?
So yeah, so I graduated, and we kept living in LA because my wife had a really like major job in the hotel that we worked at together. And at some point, just the crime and the grime of LA just got on our nerves, and we decided just on a whim to just leave. So we left. We went back to Santa Barbara, and my mother was a media person in Santa Barbara. She was a journalist in that town, and then became like part of the local university's media. She was in charge of the media. She was the chief. I used to call her the minister of propaganda for UCSB. And anyway,
that's your mom.
That's my mom. So she.
There was already a history of journalism in your family.
Yes. Yeah.
You just were trying to deny it at some level.
That's right. Yeah, she actually interviewed Ronald Reagan
Wow.
once, but yeah. So she got me an interview with somebody who was a editor at a local paper, and I was hired, and so within weeks I was a reporter for for 3 local newspapers. It was a company that had multiple newspapers in the area, and so I was a reporter for 3 of them, covering local politics.
I'm wondering though, Mike, you take this job, right? And there's some level, okay, I'm finally doing what I want to do. I have to imagine early on, it's still nagging you in the back of your head that you want to be in the Gulf or Europe or somewhere where the real action is. Isn't that nagging you in the back of your head still?
Yes, absolutely. It was nagging me that I wanted to travel. It was nagging me that I want to be in the center of things. I was always somebody who loved to have real conversations about hard stuff, about ugly things that are happening in the world. And so I just felt a little out of touch culturally in Santa Barbara, which is a very sweet and gentle and pleasant place. And so, and in my mind, I was sort of like always thinking about much rougher places and much harsher situations.
What was your first assignment? I imagine it was like cookie. It was like, go look at the dog shop over there and give me a report.
It was something like that. I had a couple of fluffy assignments, and then it got bad soon, but worse than you might think for a local paper. So like one of the things they have the new guy do is write obits. So I'd be, somebody would die, and I would write an obituary, and then that's hard to do because these people are young and they move out west and they start a farm and blah 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 blah. Decades later, they're dead, and so it's like it's really hard. And then I had a couple of really hard assignments, really hard assignments. One of them was a child died of SIDS, and I had to interview her, right, about that. SIDS is, what that is. It's like crib death, where a baby just dies in the crib. And then,
but you're interviewing her for the paper?
Yes.
On obituary?
No, not an obituary. That would be just for the story about what happened, right? And there was another case where a drug addict died alone in their house, and nobody knew until the smell of the decomposing body was too much for the neighbors, and they called and found him, and then I went and covered that, right? So that was, that was really hard. That kind of stuff happened. Like, there's nothing horrible that happens in the world that doesn't happen locally, right? And so that sort of thing I had to do and sort of get through that. It was, it was a mixed bag, actually, because that was more interesting to do than covering local water politics, which is often what I did. Would go city council meetings, and it's like, just kill me now because that's just so boring. Bunch of people bickering over land use and stuff like that, and so that really got on my nerves.
I'd imagine, though, that if you had gone into being a war correspondent, you would have had to deal with a lot more death and a lot more of these really
Yep.
sad stories that
Yep.
seem to really break your heart, because
Yep.
when you have that level of empathy and compassion for people, it's a hard thing to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a good thing I didn't do that, because that would have been, traumatizing for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So how long are you with this company of papers?
I would say about 2.5 years, something like that. I quickly became a managing editor of the paper, so I went from a reporter role to managing editor, and I was already writing opinion columns
When
for.
I'm going to interrupt. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Sometimes I interrupt people, but
it's fine.
when you're called a managing editor or the editor in chief, is your job all day to review stuff and set direction and review stuff? Is that what you're doing? Is that what your
No,
job is?
managing editor is actually the most interesting editorial job, and it's the one that I enjoyed the most. And I would later be managing editor for magazines and stuff like that. But managing editor is kind of like how would you describe it? So almost everybody is fairly specialized. The editor in chief is like an exec. They're like the CEO of the people who make the publication, who write stories and do the photography and the illustrations, all that stuff. They're in charge of all of that in a sort of executive capacity. It depends on the size of the organization. If you're an editor in chief, which I have been for editorial staffs of 3, 4, 5 people, yeah, you're just like the boss, but you're doing the same thing everybody else is doing. If you're the editor in chief for a much larger of dozens of people, which I've also done, you're kind of an executive role. You're a liaison to the salespeople, to the publisher, to the outside world, all that kind of stuff. So it can vary a lot. But when you're the managing editor, you're always doing the same thing. You're the person who's on the hook for making this thing happen. You're like the hub of the entire editorial thing. It's a managing editor's job to make sure people submit their stuff on time, to make sure that everybody gets hired and fired, and make sure that this publication actually appears when it's supposed to appear in the world, right? So, as we're talking about print at this point. So it's a great job. It's very stressful. It's very central to everything. It's just the most central thing there is in an editorial thing. It's the one person who's not a specialist. They're not like the sort of, the highfalutin executive. They're not the person who's in charge of a certain department. They're not, they're in charge kind of all of it. And so it's a really interesting role, and I enjoyed it a lot. You're basically the enforcer. You're also an editor. You're going through copy. Back in those days, when you're making a newspaper, it's almost inconceivable nowadays, but you had to make the articles fit into the space. And so articles would always be written, it was called reverse pyramid style or upside down pyramid style. And they would always be written long. So basically the first sentence has to contain the story in a nutshell. And then you sort of get more and more specific and keep going down. And so one of the jobs of the managing editor and a few other editors is to actually delete words to make it fit, or sometimes add words to make it fit. And then you have the strange artifacts. In magazines are a little more refined than newspapers. In magazines, you would actually look at the way that the words all fell on the page, and you would correct for things like rivers. So, for example, if the spaces happen to line up and your brain would detect a line of spaces that was like going down the copy like this, you'd actually rewrite, cut, add to break those rivers, right? Or you might have a hyphenated word, and the last part of the hyphen, you might have 3 characters on its own line. Well, this is unacceptable in magazine layout, right? So you have to rewrite, and so you're constantly rewriting, all this kind of stuff. You're part of assignments, you're part of everything. So the managing editor is a really, really interesting role, the most interesting role, I think.
I always think of that as like the VP of engineering's job is to make sure everything's getting done on time, everything's getting done correctly. I feel like that's what that managing editor role is. What's super interesting based on what you said? I read these old newspaper articles, and it always starts off like with some sort of summary, and then like out of the blue, the next paragraph they're repeating themselves, but in like next level detail. And I couldn't understand that until you just said,
Yeah.
sort
Well,
of
yeah.
hook people in.
Ideally, so what is the story, right? So the story is the thing that happened, the big thing. Like if you're on an escalator and you're going up and someone's going down and somebody says, "Hey, what happened?" and you have like 3 seconds to tell somebody what happened. That's the story, right? And then there are details that you don't have time for in that scenario. And that's what the lead sentence is. It's very important. So the lead sentence has to be half the story in one sentence, right? And then you trail off to details. And then by the end, you start throwing in other details like, how old somebody was or whatever it is. And so they're all the details you would want to, you essentially, you're teeing up a thing for the editor to use to fit an article into a space
really
that when you
interesting.
write the article, you don't know how long it's going to be. And so it's bizarre that, we are all very familiar with the digital world now, but it's bizarre that you had to jump through so many hoops. But every magazine and every newspaper you ever saw that's in print has to cope with that stuff. And back in those days, we had to do it without,
Computers. Yeah.
word processors. Exactly. Like in the very early days, my first newspaper job, we were literally doing it with razor blades. And glue.
Yeah, whiteboards and razor blades, right?
Yeah. Yep. Insane.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So you're there for a couple years. You became, you said, the managing editor there, which was really interesting. But I guess it's too small of a newspaper for you, right? Like another opportunity comes along.
What happened was the publishing company that I worked for was converting its systems from the old-fashioned kind to like a Macintosh-based. Back then, sort of Ethernet was pretty new, printing was pretty new, desktop publishing, they called it, was pretty new. And so like when I was a reporter, we used these old Macs with the little tiny screen and the massive key travel keyboards. But the editors, when I was an editor, we had a gigantic 17-inch screen. Like back then, it was, the CTR was like this deep and stuff like that. But I had a knack for putting that stuff together. So I got more and more involved in the transition to digital publishing. And by the end of it, I realized, man, I love this computer stuff. This is like really amazing. I really like it way better than the local politics content. And it occurred to me one day, hey, they have computer magazines. What am I doing writing about water politics when I could be writing about computers, which is super exciting and always changing, and just, it's like clearly there was a revolution brewing, and it just was very exciting. So I'm like, I'm doing that. I'm going to get a job in technology publication. I will go anywhere. I will do anything. I thought I would have to move to New York to do it because many of the big publishing companies were in New York, and I found a magazine that was in my little hometown. I mentioned earlier that I would come back to Carpinteria. It was based in Carpinteria. So these guys had a couple of brothers who had written some software code. The software was stolen by a large Silicon Valley-based company. They sued the company. They won the lawsuit, and they got a big windfall. And they took the windfall and they launched a magazine.
Wow.
And so it was a collection of people who were mostly technology people. There were engineers and stuff like that who were doing this publication. And the publication is called OS2 Magazine.
OS2.
OS2 Magazine. And so.
So for anybody who's not listening, that's not old enough. Real quick. So IBM was writing an operating system called OS2 at the time. Microsoft was doing their operating system at the same time. Guess who won? There's a great book about that story too.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was called.
Well, this magazine was part of the story because the first issue when I got there, they'd already published, a year or so of issues. The magazine was called OS2 Magazine. The second issue that I did, it was called OS2 and Windows Magazine. The third one was called Windows and OS2 Magazine, and the fourth one was called Windows Magazine. And and it happened that quickly. It
It
just was
did.
clear what was happening. And but what I didn't realize is that the reason they had hired me was they wanted to legitimize their operation for acquisition. So they knew that they were trying to sell to a New York-based publishing company, and they knew that uh, they were sort of too much of a bootstrap startup, and they wanted to professionalize it with a professional journalist in charge, stuff like that. So they hired me as managing editor. The people came out, they acquired us, and so of the staff of 10 or so people, they took three of us, and we went to New York to relaunch Windows Magazine. And so I was the editor, first the managing editor, then the executive editor, then the editor in chief of Windows Magazine for the 90s, basically for the decade of the 90s.
That's really interesting how that fell into your lap. Like timing's everything, right?
Yep,
Like the
everything.
timing was just so amazingly perfect for you to end up in New York for that magazine in the 90s, which is really when this was a big deal. Like for that
And
decade.
to explain to the kids listening that why this was a big deal, you have to understand that the sort of personal computing revolution was gigantic. We, on the first issue of the relaunch, I remember my boss wrote an article, and he was talking about how gigantic Windows was, what a gigantic user base Windows had. And the user base was 4 million people. And he was talking about how big that was. And so it was within 3 or 4 years, it was 400 million people. I mean, it was the revolution was just so you have to realize how new this was to everybody, and it was coming into business. So like businesses for whom this stuff was obviously very important, and who would spend a ton of money to make it all happen because it was a competitive advantage for them. Everybody needed tons and tons and tons of information about this stuff, and there was no web, right, to speak of that could answer it. I mean, there was a web. The web existed, but it was like not satisfactory.
You weren't worried about American Online and
No.
CompuServe or any of
Right.
that sort of.
Or the gray websites with blue letters and so little animated graphics and stuff. They weren't satisfying the need for breaking. So with the number of people getting new computers and using them in business doubling like all the time, people needing information, everybody went to magazines to answer their questions. And so that's why the 90s was so amazing. By the end of the decade, they were going to the internet and increasingly had no use for print magazines. But between 1990 and 2000, magazines were king. We were publishing 400-page issues, and it was mostly advertising, and those ads were really expensive, and we were just making bank. I would go I had to go every year to justify the budget, and I think on the third or fourth year, I went to the guy to try to explain to him that we need to spend all this money, and he just stopped me. You stop right there. He's like, you spend whatever you want because you guys
We're
are
printing
making
money in
so
the
much.
back.
You're making 90%, 95% of the money for this company, and the company had like 12 publications because the other publications were considered business to business publications. So they were more obscure topics, but we were covering Windows, which is the thing in the 90s. And so it was just a crazy time, just a crazy gold rush kind of a feeling.
I had Byte magazine back in the 80s, mid 80s to probably early 90s after I graduated from university. Byte magazine was I couldn't wait for that magazine to come in, but they were targeting developers. Your magazine must have been targeting executives.
Yeah, we were just targeting a whole range of people, like enthusiasts, people who like to build their own systems. We were targeting business people. We were targeting, we had a whole range. So like in the back of the magazine, we had all these opinion columns, and it started out with like a step-by-step how-to guide for beginners, and it kept getting progressively more complicated. And we had a software programming thing. We had a networking thing. We had all these different subject matters and very, very brilliant people. But just the Byte magazine connection for us is that one of the editor-in-chief of Byte magazine, I believe it was the editor-in-chief, Fred Langa, was the guy they hired to launch Windows magazine. So he was my boss when I first started.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
And so there was a strong. We replicated some of the stuff that were happening at Byte magazine. They had actually like a CompuServe like message board called Bix, I think it was called. And so we launched one called Wix, right? Windows Internet Information Exchange, I think was the acronym. But anyway, yeah. So he took sort of like a lot of stuff he learned from Byte and brought it over to Windows Magazine. We were always more consumer friendly, always more beginner friendly than Byte. But you know, we were like probably closer to PC Magazine or PC Computing. And or PC World, right? So there was the four of us publications that were the main publications.
So you're doing that for 10 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when do you realize that things are switching over back to the browser at this point? Like at some point you must be seeing it. Is it because subscriptions are down, or especially a guy like you who loves tech? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. In the company, you know, with all these executives, they were selling all kinds of ads, doing all this stuff, trying to really make the company a big. It was called CMP Media. There was a handful of us in the editorial departments of a couple of the publications who really did the best job of seeing the writing on the wall. And you know, we were telling them in '92 or something, the web is going to be everything, and they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. And so. So there was a lot of that kind of thing, but yeah, it was like part of the problem was it was such a scene. It was such a, you know, I spent half my time doing TV appearances and stuff like that, speaking at shows. There was a guy who was a full-time guy who's like he was almost like my agent, like within the company. His full-time job was to get me on CNN, stuff like that. So I spent all my time traveling and speaking and being on TV and stuff like that.
But it's exciting because you're a young guy back then too. I mean,
it was okay. You know, it was somewhat exciting, but I could tell that, like, you know, it was. I could tell it was all kind of becoming kind of a shell of what it was, and it was a lot of appearance making, and like CNET was like new, and they were kind of killing it electronically, and I was always telling people, if we're smart, what we'll do is we'll just go electronic, like we'll be super electronic, right? We should just be a website, or we should slim down the staff and we should hire more freelancers and just restructure so we don't have these high costs. And so we just kept building up the cost, and then the income just sort of plummeting in the 98, 99, 2000. And so it just wasn't, you know, it was all this weird stuff that were happening, and you know, we did have layoffs and all this stuff. In the meantime, I was sort of headhunted for a startup that was going to do a whole new electronic publication around mobile computing, which is one of my, you know, favorite topics. And so I basically quit and got a job at this startup, and we were around.
What year is that?
2000 or 99, late 99.
Because the mobile is still not. It's not like I didn't see the internet honestly until '94 when I walked into somebody's office and I'm like, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm connecting to the internet." What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But like even mobile in 2004 was still not. I don't remember when first iPhone came out. It wasn't. Was
no, 2007 was the iPhone.
2007, right?
Yeah. So what
early,
we were talking
mobile.
Yeah, what we were talking about was laptops and things like that. So, and we knew that mobile was going to be everything in the future. So that was part of one of the reasons they hired me, is because that was my belief. I'm like, this is going to explode. Everybody's going to be using a laptop. Back, you know, there was a time in the 90s where I would get on a plane now and I would have a laptop and use it on the plane, and people are like, wow, never saw that before. That's incredible. And I did a bunch of like crazy stunts. Like, for example, I was one of the first people to see the Palm Pilot, which is the first quote unquote PDA, when it's 9 months before it was released, and had one and stuff like that. But I was like, I did all kinds of crazy stunts. So for you super nerds out there listening, you'll really love this. So I think I'm the first and probably only person to ever send a fax from an airplane via a Palm Pilot. So the Palm Pilot had exactly how. So the Palm Pilot had a separate fax attachment that almost nobody had. Like, why would you want to send a fax from a PDA, right? So what kind of insane person would do that? But I had eval unit. Basically, didn't buy it. It was sent it to me to test it. So this was designed to connect to a dial-up system. So I actually I plugged it into an acoustic coupler, strapped the acoustic coupler to, back then the phones there was a phone behind every seat, like where they have screens now. They used to have a phone and a credit card. You swipe your credit card and you can make a call.
Oh my God, I remember seeing that.
Yeah, that was
real.
Oh
my God.
That's real. And so I strapped an acoustic coupler to this airplane phone and sent a fax from the air via a Palm Pilot. Why anybody would want to do this, they wouldn't.
Okay, but what was the fax? Was it just hi from 30,000
Hey, yeah, exactly. Like, exactly. Hey, I'm in an airplane. Smiley face. Totally
First
pointless.
text message.
Probably cost $15 or something for the call. But I was super into all kind, like back in those days, people used acoustic couplers, like literally to connect your laptop in a hotel room. The hotel didn't have Wi-Fi. Right. And so you would take the plate. It was very common among us geeks. We would take the face plate off the phone thing. We'd use alligator clips to clip. It's like crazy stuff people used. You'd have carry a kit with all this stuff for basically just sort of connecting to things. Anyway, so I was super into that. We do, and so it was called Portable Life. That was the name of the startup. And I was there about 6 months, and then the .com thing crashed, and the whole thing was over. So that didn't last long. And it was interesting, though, because I moved to Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley was an absolute boom town. You absolutely couldn't find a place to live, and everybody was hiring. Like they would pay you anything. And I was like, wow, this is like a crazy boom town. And then when that .com crashed, that reversed. There was housing everywhere, and you couldn't get a job. And so that's when I said, okay, I'm gonna. I did some consulting things like that, but that's when I really started going pro as a freelance opinion columnist.
But what year is this now?
2000.
Okay. So
yeah,
you have relationships in the publishing world still, which is is good, right?
Yeah.
So you just start making phone calls and you say, I've got opinions on things, publish. So if you can kind of share, it's year 2000.
Yeah.
You get like $100 for a piece. You get $500 for how does that work in terms of money?
People used to get paid a lot more than they do now. So right now, today, if you're a young person starting out in freelance business and want to write for a publication, you're not going to get paid anything. Back then, the better paid people get like $1 a word, something like that. Right. So
by the word.
Yes.
That doesn't seem like a good incentive in terms of writing something.
Well, you'd get paid by the word, and they would say, okay, we're going to pay you up to this many words. So it was a set amount, but that's essentially, if you had a 1,200 word column, you could write 1,300 words, 1,400 words, but they're only going to pay you $1,200. But that's a lot of money for one article. Nowadays, if you want to write for a major publication online and you're a freelancer just doing journalism and you're not a staffer, you're just a freelancer, they're going to pay you $50 or something like that. It's brutal. But back then, like you say, I knew everybody, and I basically just, it was pretty easy for me to get work, just call somebody I knew, and they're like, yeah, we'd love to have you write. And okay, I'll write a weekly thing and we'll pay you, And so I've been doing that for a long time. And then there was a brief period of time where I was the editor-in-chief of another publication or two, but I always wanted to go back to being a freelance editorial writer, opinion columnist. I did another gig that was like super lucrative where I was like moderating these events there's a couple of companies, major companies that wanted to do this dog and pony show where they wanted to have some of their executives talking about some new concept in data center technology, and they wanted basically a journalist to like interview them on stage in front of a bunch of potential customers. And we went to London and Tokyo and Seoul, Korea, and Beijing and Mumbai and like all this stuff, and that was great. They paid me a fortune. That was fun. And then I was actually making a ton of money on that and also making good money on writing. And then what happened was, and this is the part we haven't talked about, this is probably the only interesting thing about me, which is that I'm nomadic, which I don't have a permanent house. My wife and I travel full time, and we've been doing it since.
You don't have kids?
We have kids, but they're all grown up. So they're adults. And so since about 2006, my wife and I have been traveling full time. Right now I'm in Italy. I'm about an hour and a half drive north of Rome. And we live in Europe, Mexico, Morocco, and all these other places full time. And this is what we love to do. And we've been doing it for many, many years. But that when I did that, my income dropped by about half, and my cost of living dropped to about a third. So it actually came out ahead financially. And that calculation has changed a lot. So like it's much more expensive to travel nowadays.
Yeah.
To rent a place to be in, airfare, all that stuff is way more expensive now. Back then it was like a total cheat code. We lived in Athens, we lived in Nairobi for nothing. Like when we lived in Greece, I think the first time we lived in Sparta, Greece, I think we paid $700 a month for kind of a cool apartment. Nowadays, that same apartment would cost $3,000, $4,000 for a month, something like that. So it's become very expensive, but we still do it, and we love traveling.
So a couple things pop in my head because I always had the idea of maybe doing that for a year, go spend a month in Boston and then go spend a month. And maybe you do Europe too, right? But I never thought about doing it beyond 1 year because I just think I'd be finally wanting my own place. So two things. I'd love to hear about the epiphany you had, or did this just happen naturally because of what you were doing? And I guess you're still not in a place in your mind where you feel like I want to settle down now and establish a home.
It's so the epiphany came when my wife had a real pressure cooker of a job. She had a really interesting career for a while when we were in Silicon Valley. She was like a fixer for startups. So startups, your typical startup, it's a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. They're putting together some technology. There's somebody in the company who's trying to get them funding, going around with the dog and pony show to all the, Sand Hill Road and stuff like that, trying to get funding for their startup. And then successful startups get the funding. So what happens when a startup gets funding? It's kind of a crazy thing that people don't really think about. So you have some people who basically don't know anything about anything except engineering typically, or maybe a little bit of marketing or this, that, and the other thing, but they don't know about all the rest of it. And so when you get funding, like, somebody gives you, $50 million. If you're scraping by in somebody's living room and all of a sudden they're like, okay, here's $50 million, go, we want a product in 6 months. How do you do that? Like, who does that? And so that was my wife's job. They would call her and she would come in and she would find a space for them in 3 days. She would get lawyers lined up for all this other stuff. She would do all this minutia you don't even think about when you are building a company quickly. And she would just handle the hiring, handle the stuff, making sure everybody had food.
She was the hired gun.
Exactly.
Make sure the money was being spent the way it was, and to spend the money.
Make sure that they were that they could grow fast and function, and be legal and all that kind of stuff. So she did that for one company. Then she did it for another company. She became an on-demand, a in-demand person for this, and was well known by a number of people. And then one of the companies she was with, it was like a game of musical chairs. They did that. They brought her in. They were growing fast, and then they got acquired again by AT&T. And so they said, basically, we want to take this startup and we're going to put the principals of the startup in charge of the software division of AT&T. And so her boss, the person who hired her, was in charge of the software division of AT&T. Like, this is a giant company. And she was like his right-hand man. And so she had she was kind of running things. So she was overseeing hundreds of people. Brutal job, just absolutely brutal. And so after doing that, 6 months or something, she was essentially working 7 days a week. We're like, we have to take a vacation. So we went to Greece, to Athens, and we were there a couple of weeks. And she's like, I'm not going back. I can't go back to that. I love this so much. She called and quit. And they offered to double her salary, and she still quit. And so we just stayed in Greece for like 9 months. And we
You
traveled.
had a house back in the States at the time?
We did. Yeah. Back then we had a house. We still had one of our kids living in the house, and he just sort of lived in the house by himself. And so we were like, this is the best thing ever. Back then there was no Airbnb, there was no Uber.
Right, right.
Wi-Fi was not totally universal. And so what we would do is we'd get a guidebook, or we'd look online and we'd find a hotel, book a hotel for 3-4 days. We'd stay in the hotel. And when we were staying in the hotel, we'd walk around looking for signs of somebody renting something. And that's how we did it. And then we'd find somebody who would knock on the door. Yeah, we'd like to rent your thing. Okay, sure. Yeah, here's what it is. And so we did that.
I have to ask this, Mike. I have to ask this, because at this point in your life, right, I want to talk about, without getting too specific, income. Because how old are you at this point? You're in your 40s, or are you still in your 30s at this point? 2006.
Let's see. I was 20, 40s.
You're in your 40s.
40s, mid to late 40s, yeah.
So I always have this in my head that if you're only making money while you're standing up, you're never really going to become financially wealthy, right? You got to be able to make money while you're sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
And you just decided that your wife was going to quit her job. Mm-hmm. And the only income at this point is every time you publish an article, right? So, like, did you not care about that at this point? Because that's just mentally where you needed to be? Or I don't know why I always had this thing where I got 7 kids I managed today, right? At the time it was 5.
Right.
And so when I hear people just talk about funcations and stuff, I just laugh. I'm like, I've never been in a position to just not consider income at some level, right?
Right.
So I'm just curious your state of mind at that point. Or are you so good at investing and saving that it wasn't an issue?
Well, it was worse than it sounds, because in fact I was very particular about investing, because I for ethical reasons I would never invest in a tech company. And so we just basically didn't have any investments to speak of. But our point of view was, and I actually wrote a book about this, published in 2017, and emphasized the financial side of it. But basically my perspective was that, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to slave away, work at a job, raise your kids, and then someday you retire. And then when you retire, then you can have fun. And so, or another version of that is like you work really hard, you get really lucky, and you make a ton of money, right? You get very wealthy. And then why would you want to be wealthy? Well, one of the reasons you want to be wealthy is that you can travel, right? So we're like, let's just skip to the end of that part, right? Let's just instead of waiting and then retiring, or making a fortune and then spending the money on travel, let's just travel now. Let's just travel. And so, financially, it's been a mixed picture, depending on the economy, depending on a whole bunch of things, depending on the work. My wife has done different jobs that she could do remotely. And so, it's touch and go, not ideal. We weren't making a ton of money, but we could also, one of the things that I point out in my book is that when you are normal, right, you find yourself in a position where your costs, for the most part, are predictable, for the most part, and your income can be unpredictable. So you could suddenly get laid off, and now you go from plenty of money to pay all your bills to no money, right? That's possible. Or you could, Uncle Fester could die and you could inherit $10 million, and suddenly your income changes for the better. But, your mortgage and your car insurance and all that stuff is, it goes up, and you might spend more here or there, or less here and there. But for the most part, you're on the hook for these expenses, especially when you have kids. When you're nomadic, the expenses that you have are super flexible. So if you are somebody who wants to launch a business and you need to be really tight with money for a while, or let's say you lose some of your work, you can move to a place where it's very inexpensive. You can just move to,
Move to
Ecuador.
Bali.
Yeah.
Go to Bali, right?
Or even cheaper than that.
Yeah.
You can like there, you can bring your expenses down to $1,000 a month total for as long as you need to. Or
Yeah.
if you're doing great financially and you don't mind spending, you can go to Switzerland and you can have a very expensive life, but you can control it, right? You can dial it up and down on a dime, right? So that's another benefit. What actually happened is my wife is really brilliant in food and beverage, always has been, hospitality, all this kind of stuff, and we've always been super travelers. Years ago, I was super into Google Plus, and so we were always posting these magnificent pictures of all this, all our lifestyle, all the food and stuff, and wine tastings, stuff like that. We always used to do, and people were like, "Man, I wish we could do that. I wish we could join you and do that stuff." And one day, my wife's like, maybe people can join us. Like, what if we just put together in these places where we know a lot of people, we know chefs, we know winemakers, we know all these people. What if we just condensed like a lot of the fun stuff we do over a period of like 6 months? And what if we condensed that 6 months into 1 week and we had people join us and, they could pay, a
For the
cost.
experience.
Yeah. So she created something called the Gastronomad Experiences. And so that's what she does for a living now. And so we do in many of these places around the world. We do. I think we have one coming up in Venice in the Prosecco Hills, a week and a half or something like that, 2 weeks, where a group of people are going to come. She planned everything. They're going to meet our winemaker friends. They're going to meet our cheesemaker friends. We're going to do all kinds of super fun food and wine stuff for 1 week, and that's her living. And she actually makes a
That's
really good
brilliant.
living. Yeah, she makes a great.
But you do have to, plan that out. How many
Yeah.
months in advance, right? So that you have to plan because people have to have time to buy and all that.
Well, she's doing some aspects of these things require certain types of booking. So to book transportation for a group like that, and to book lodging, to book the really good lodging, like everything, every aspect of this thing is like as good as it can as possible. And so to book that kind of lodging, it's 2 years out. So she's on the hook all over the world for already paid for all these lodging, transportation, multiple things like that.
Reserving.
Yeah.
the
So
rooms
it's
and everything.
it really is something that grew into this situation where, and then since you're paying for it, and many of these things have no refund or whatever, so you have to make it happen. So there's a lot of risk, but there's a lot of reward, and the biggest reward is the lifestyle it gives us, because then we
they're paying for that experience too because it's coming out of the. No, that's brilliant.
exactly.
And I'm sure she has a reputation at this point anyway, where now there's risk. Obviously, the economy
Yeah.
could crash tomorrow,
Yeah.
and with all the crazy stuff going on in the world, right?
Yeah.
So there is risk, but
Yeah.
assuming the world stays sane for a couple of years.
Yeah, but just the big
Brilliant.
picture is that when we first started doing it, the first decade we were doing this, things were a lot cheaper, and we made a lot less money. And then as they've become more expensive, we've actually my wife has figured out how to monetize our lifestyle, for lack of a better framing, so that there's a lot more money. It costs a lot more to live the way we do, and we have a lot more money to do what we do. My income has not really changed substantially, but hers has gone from nothing to, it went from really good income to nothing to now she makes a really good income again. But we work for ourselves, so it's like it's a whole different thing, and it's like we really love our lifestyle. I mean, it's just we're really having a good time.
And it takes a lot of stress off of you to have to write that article, right? I mean, if you decide I don't want to work next week, you're free to just sort of veg at this point then, which is
That's
kinda
true
cool.
theoretically, but I couldn't imagine doing that. I will keep writing for as long as I can because I just enjoy it so much, and I have so many things I want to do. So many books I want to write, so many things. So I want to really grow my newsletter to.
Yeah, I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
I want to shift into first. The story is absolutely amazing, but I imagine two things now. I imagine all the relationships you had at all these companies are somewhat gone just because people get old and retire more so than anything else. So do you still have a network Let me just say this too. I walked into a Barnes and Noble for the first time over the summer, and I couldn't comprehend how many magazines there were on the rack. I thought that the magazines were dead, and yet there were, I don't know, 100 of them on the
Yeah.
rack in
Yeah.
beautiful glossy print and stuff. And so my perception of print completely got thrown out. Maybe there's a resurgence. I don't know. I'd love you to talk a little bit about that too. But
Yeah.
um, your relationships now with that industry, are they still there? Or are they not there? With the way the
Yeah.
industry has gone.
Yeah, I have a lot of people in technology journalism that are still around. Have a lot of friends who retired and so on. But you know, I've made a lot of new connections as well along the way, and so many of the you know, people who do that kind of stuff do podcasts, and sometimes I interact with them on podcasts. About 10 years ago, we put a pause on our nomadic lifestyle for 2 years, and I was hired by Twit, the This Week in Tech podcast network, to do their daily news show. So I did Tech News Today, which is a daily news podcast. Did that for 2 years, and during those 2 years, the whole point of the show is that I interviewed technology journalists who had just broken a story that day. So I'd go through all the news at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd find people who broke stories in the Wall Street Journal or other publications, and I would have them on that morning to talk about their scoop, right? And this is
What a brilliant idea. Yeah.
yeah, thank you. I thought it was great, and it was mostly about the news, but it was also about the journalism, right? It was also about, and so many of those people that I had on, because I had, you know, I had 1, 2, 3, or 4 people per day, 5 days a week for 2 years. So I got to interview everybody who was doing like really killer journalism. So these people like Kashmir Hill, who's now at the New York Times and just killing it in the sphere of privacy. You know, back then she was, I think, I forgot the publications she was working at, but she was like, you know, kind of a beginner, right? So I know a lot of people like that who I had on who were, you know, doing great work in journalism, and I got to know them, and then they went on, and so that really gave me a big injection of contacts and
For your network. Yeah.
for the network. So
Yeah.
I got a great network, and so I'm really lucky because of that, and that was a great experience as well. And I work with you know, Leo Laporte, who's just a fantastic guy and a good friend, and he's just you know, it was just a good experience all the way around.
Did you get burned out after 2 years? Because I find like I can do something for 2 or 3 years and it just starts to get, I don't
Yeah.
want to say old, but
Yeah.
I taught a class for 5 years, and
Mhm.
I turned to my business partner one day. I was teaching like 25 weeks out of the year, right? And I said, if I say these words one more time, you're going to have to commit me.
Yeah.
Like I can't do it anymore. So like,
It was I liked the podcast medium. I made it harder on myself than I had to. I could have done it more sustainably, but really the thing that got to me was the not traveling. So you know, we really got used to traveling, and one of the reasons, there were several reasons why I made the choice to accept that position. One of them is that one of my sons was getting married, and another one is I love Sonoma County, which is where that network is based in Petaluma, California, which is in Sonoma County. Beautiful wine country. We always love that place. And so we thought, okay, this all lines up actually. So we'll spend a year. I'll work at this place. We'll live in Petaluma, California. We'll live in Sonoma County. And during that year, we'll sort of plan our son's wedding, and he can get married at our house. So we rented a house just for his wedding, basically. We lived there for a year, and then after that year, we moved to an organic farm because we wanted to experience organic farming, and that was another amazing aspect to it. I mean, there were actually mornings when we were farm sitting, and so I would literally get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to feed pigs and feed the cow, and you know, the calf, you know, with a bottle and all this stuff in the darkness. And then I would go into my home office and I would prep the show, and the show started at 9 a.m. and I would do the show from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. And then I would go home, crash, sleep for an hour, wake up and write columns, and did it for 2 years. And so it was physically exhausting, but it really was the lack of travel. So after 2 years, I'm like, this is such a cool gig, and I'm so lucky to do it. And I, really like the people I'm working for, and it was all good, but I wasn't traveling.
But it's time.
2 years to the day, I gave my notice that it would end 2 years to the day, and then we immediately put all our stuff in storage and took off. And we've been traveling full time ever since.
Again. All right. I want another 20 minutes with you, Mike.
Sure.
You have
Yeah.
another 20 minutes to give me?
Oh, yeah,
Okay, good,
absolutely.
good. Because what I want to spend the next 20 minutes on, because you've seen the industry from the really even earlier than me. I want to spend 20 minutes talking about AI. I want to hear your thoughts and opinions on these things. And this is what you're sort of focused on now, right? With your
with the
your
Machine Society
website
newsletter.
and your newsletter. And we'll get all that in the show notes. Because so give me the website right now, so anybody listening in the car can bring it up real quick.
It's machinesociety.ai.
Machine Society, and there you can subscribe to the newsletter.
You can subscribe to the newsletter. There's a paid version, but the free version has 99% of the stuff. So it's like, unlike a lot of Substack type newsletters where they really tease you and then you have to pay to get it. Really, it's a really good newspaper for people. So if you don't want to pay for newsletter, you'll still get almost all of it.
I'm a software developer, right? So, and I'm 56 years old. I'm a software developer. And I might be one of the few people I meet that I'm really excited with what at least the large language models are doing for code generation. I love the tooling. Like, you would have to pry it out of my dead hands right now to take it away from me. And I leverage it more and more. I'm at a point where I only go to Google when the AI agent isn't giving. My favorite saying now is, I'll pay for that. Because you have to, what's funny is they were paying you by the word. We're now paying for tokens. We've kind of come full circle 30 years, right? Like, we're paying for tokens now. And I'll be like, I'll pay for that. And I'll ask it a question. I'm using a product from SourceGraph called AMP, which is pay as you go, which I think is the right business model. I think all these companies like Cursor that are trying to do these flat fees are going to die because they're just not generating profit, right? So I appreciate what SourceGraph is doing, saying, hey, we want to be sustainable. Anyway, that's what I'm using it for. I'm not using it for really anything else. Now, my wife, and I have one student left who's in 8th grade, they're leveraging Gemini quite a bit to help with homework and to help with things. And the 8th grader, I just want to set this up. And the 8th grader is constantly paranoid that she's going to get caught that we're using chat or Gemini, let's say, for anything. And we keep telling her, right? If it's something that you're writing, you're still using your own words. We're just getting information. Or if it's the math, right? Like, I was going to use Google anyway. What's the big deal? So she is constantly paranoid. And one last thing before I'm gonna let you go. I had seen Fareed. Fareed Zakaria? He's on CNN.
Zakaria. Yeah.
I would love to meet that guy.
Yeah.
If I was the president of the United States, he'd be sitting next to me at all times.
Right. The court advisor, right?
Oh, that guy is brilliant.
He is.
I have his show. I don't record many shows. I record his show so I don't miss it. Anyway, he had somebody, I think it was on his show, he had somebody on, and they said, education is going to shift back to oral. That it's not going to be written based anymore because of all the AI tooling. That you're going to go to school and every exam is going to have to be words coming out of your mouth, right? And okay, so I just wanted to share all that with you because I'm really interested in sort of your thoughts about, are you excited? Are you not excited? I think people our age maybe are more excited than the younger people. I don't know. Anyway, I'm done. I'm going to shut up. Go.
Okay. So I got a lot of thoughts about this topic. I love talking about it. I love thinking about it. It's the topic of the century, I think. And so basically, the way I look at it is this: first of all, we think about chatbots. When we think about AI, we think about LLM-based chatbots or RAG systems, also like Perplexity and so on. That it's search and chatbots combined. But really, the LLM revolution is revolutionizing medicine, geology. It's having micro revolutions in almost every field, and we don't see those. We don't really pay attention to those. I tend to do that. Like I as part of my daily information diet, I go through all the press releases that the scientific community releases. Universities doing all kinds of stuff in robotics and stuff like that, and 95% of the stuff that's happening with LLMs has nothing to do with chatbots. It's about detecting Parkinson's. So if you're like a naysayer about LLMs or AI in general, take another look, because it's really going to make life amazing. So back to the chatbots. So we have an interesting choice, all of us, in our relationship with chatbots. We have to learn how we want to interact with them. So as a analogy, I travel a lot, go to a lot of airports. You go to airports and there's distances between the gates. They often have moving sidewalks. And so there are two kinds of people who use moving sidewalks. There are people who get on the moving sidewalk and they stand there and let the moving sidewalk carry them.
Mind-blowing to me.
Mind-blowing.
I don't understand that.
And there are people who get on and they love the rush of being like Superman. They walk even faster and they're just ripping through the airport at high speed. Me too, right? So what's happening there? So there are people who see that technology as a way to arrive at the same thing with less effort. And there are people who look at the technology as an accelerant to arrive much faster to where you want to go. And AI is exactly the same. So you can use AI chatbots to dumb yourself down, to become completely incompatible with the modern workforce, and to essentially, everybody's worried that AI is going to take our job, essentially volunteering to have AI take your job. Because if you let all these skills atrophy because you let AI do all the work for you, then why, there's only a matter of time before agentic AI is going to be able to do all the rest of the stuff, and then you're out the door, and AI will do your job. But there are other people who use it to accelerate their learning, to accelerate what they're capable of, to enhance their capabilities, to augment themselves as individuals, but as professionals in whatever their profession is. And I, needless to say, highly recommend that. Let's talk about writing.
First of all, I love that analogy, Mike. Brilliant analogies. I'm going to have to listen to that one. Brilliant analogy, Mike.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's one that I just noticed when I'm rushing through the airport on the moving sidewalk. So we have to think about the basics here. What is writing? Right? What is it for? Like, why does it exist? Right? Writing is a way to externalize your thoughts. Why would anybody want to externalize their thoughts? Well, one reason is you want to communicate them to someone else, right? So you can talk, and talking, oral storytelling, as you were saying, historically had a problem of scale. Only so many people can hear you talking. And maybe it's 200 people, but like beyond that, but if you write something, 5 million people can read what you've written, theoretically. But the main reason you want to externalize your thoughts is you want to be able to look at them yourself. Like, you want to look at your thoughts and think and really ponder them, have them be stationary instead of just having your brain going and going. And then you're like, that's not exactly right. There's something wrong. And so you think more. It causes you to have internal thoughts. Then you externalize those again in writing, and then you look again, and then you go this process of going back and forth between internalizing and externalizing your thoughts is how we refine our thoughts and make them much more sophisticated, much more bulletproof, much more useful, much better, right? It's how we expand our minds, essentially. If you outsource the process of expanding your mind to AI, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Like, this is a terrible idea. You should not do that. the way people think of it is like, oh, my job is, I'm not a writer. My job is to do this other thing. I learned to write when I was in grade school. I got through college. I've been there, done that. I know how to write. I don't need to, I want to make that easier and faster. So I'm just going to let ChatGPT write my emails and write, everything, write my blog posts, write a book. People are actually using AI to write books, which is ridiculous. Okay, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Instead, you can look at AI as an accelerant to become a better writer. And by a better writer, I mean a better thinker, right? That's really the end goal. And so there are prompts you can use. It's a great idea to get really good at prompt engineering. And there are prompts you can use where you can basically say, and I use some of these, where you write a thing, I'll write a blog post, say, or an email or anything, but let's just call it a blog post, right? You're making an argument, trying to persuade the reader. And you can drop that into ChatGPT or Perplexity or any of these other chatbots with the prompt and say, you're my intellectual sparring buddy, and I want you to tear this down and basically argue against all my points with using data and facts and perspective and so on, and have it come and you can go back and forth with the chatbot to really refine your thoughts. Because one of the things that chatbots are the best at is exposing our blind spots, right? And they can expose, they'll make points where you're like, well, that the chatbot didn't really get it. But they'll make other points where it's like, oh, wow, yeah, I should really consider that. Or I should, that's a really great point. And then you can go back to your writing. You don't take its writing. You go back to your writing and you refine your arguments. Another one you can do is, and I do this all the time, I have multiple processes for fact checking, but I'll take an article, I'll write a whole article, and then I'll drop it into Perplexity and I'll say, I do role prompting. You are a really stringent fact checker with very high standards, and you're very meticulous. I want you to go point by point through this entire thing and fact check every single claim. And then it will do that. And it's like, this one is ambiguous, this one's true, this one's false, and here's why. So
when you do that one, are you relying completely on what's in the LLM, or are there MCP servers that will allow the model to fact check against the internet? Are you doing any of that too?
I'll use Perplexity, which is actually doing searches on this topic and pulling from those searches. But sometimes I'll specify the sources, or sometimes I specify the category of sources. Another way to fact check your stuff is through Notebook LM, which is Google's thing. And if the facts really come from detailed scientific PDFs, which is often the case in my case, I'll drop the PDF in Notebook LM, and then I'll drop in my stuff and I'll say fact just this against the PDF. And so this is again, you don't want to take anybody's word for it. Any particular service, you want multiple sources. But the point is, and this is why I use a tool called Lex. So Lex is it's a word processor that's both in the cloud. It's also a desktop application. And it uses AI in a way that doesn't write for you. It won't write for you. It'll be you can have a conversation with it and you say, how can I strengthen my argument? And it'll give you some ideas. And you're like, well, that's a good idea. Maybe I'll think about that. And you go back and your words are the thing. And it'll do grammar checking. And it'll look for things words that, like, you can do a custom thing where I often say, find needless jargon in this and give me plainer language for this, and it won't do it for you, but it'll suggest, it's like, how about this? And you're like, no, it doesn't really. How about this? Okay, actually that's a good idea. It's like and so you can leverage AI, but it will never do the work for you. It always goes through your own head. You're
pairing with it, judgment. Just like we do as software developers. It's like a pairing.
Exactly.
I think one of the reasons I'm burnt out from writing is because I'm the kind of writer where I write one or two paragraphs and I can get stuck feeling like I'm not conveying what I want to say. And I can't move on to the next paragraph until I feel that's right. Then I can feel it's right. I can write two more paragraphs, go away, come back. And I'm a top-down reader for everything, whether it's source code or my writing. And I'll read it again and I'm like, no, I had context in my head when I wrote that, and it's missing. And that process was so tough for me.
Yeah, I mean, just like you see movie and TV depictions of writers, and they often depict fiction writers and fiction. It's like, oh, I have all these ideas in my head. I'm going to sit down and write these ideas. But like nonfiction is brutal because for every sentence you have to spend a half an hour like doing research, and it's not just this flowing thing. You're not Jack Kerouac just pouring your ideas into the typewriter. You're like constructing this thing, and it really there's oftentimes no sense of flow because, like you say, you do a couple of paragraphs and you can't move on until you have really are certain that it has all the factual weight behind it. That you have to be very confident that you're saying something that's true, that's the right thing to say. And so so nonfiction can be like that. I came up with a technique which I think anybody can try for breaking through writer's block, which is that. So first of all, understand that every sentence in a nonfiction piece, whether you're doing training, whether you're doing whatever you're doing, is a statement of fact, right? So what does that mean? So you want every single thing is a statement of fact. So for example, if I say, I love orange juice, that's not a statement of fact. That's opinion, right? No, I'm sorry. If you say orange juice is good, that's not a statement of fact. That's an opinion, right? But if you say, I think orange juice is good, that's a statement of fact, right? If it's true. So your initial goal is to create a list of true facts in any order, and doesn't matter what order. So you can be reading all this stuff and you're like, okay, there's something I want to say. And you say it in the most concise, actual way you can, and leave a sentence, and it's disconnected from anything else. You're not doing a narrative. You're not nothing. And so if you can get yourself to the point where you have, 40 or 50 sentences that are all factually true on the topic that you're writing about, okay, now you've got the raw material to start building a story. You start moving things around until they're of a kind in the same general subject. And then you sort of massage all that stuff into a story. You never have writer's block with that, because what you're doing is you're exploring subjects and you say, okay, there's something occurred to me that I want to say. And then you say it, right? And it's a wonderful technique but you get comfortable with moving the content around, massaging it, like rearranging it. And
it's crazy you're saying this, because I was taught that without realizing it now. I was taught in high school to get your 4x6 index cards, go into all of your sources, write down facts. I realize now they were facts. Get 50 of these cards. I used to do this in college too. It's the only way I could write papers.
Yeah.
Everything you just said,
yeah.
I realize now I was taught in high school, but using index cards to sort of do it.
One of the biggest tools for book writers is called Scrivener. It's got an old-fashioned interface, but essentially it's basically a digital set of 3x5 index cards that you can put everything into these cards, and then you can rearrange the cards. I used it for a little while, didn't care for it. A lot of writers swear by it. So that's another way to do it. But again, you can break through writer's block by just getting every single isolated fact that you want to say down, and you're on your way. And then you'll end up filling in, doing transitions, all the stuff that you might want to do to make it a readable story. But really, you just get the facts down, and don't worry about the order, or don't worry about having one fact follow another fact in the same vein. Forget about the veins. Just get the facts in any order on paper, or not paper, but on the page, and then you're almost there.
So here's my current project. I have a 20-hour class that people want converted into a book. It's a 20-hour sort of video, all right? People want it in a book. And I already told you I can't write books anymore. So what I've been working on for the last 2 weeks is writing some code that takes a minute chunk of video at a time. It does a transcription, but video transcriptions are almost useless because it's what's on the screen. So I've got the AI already now extracting any source code pretty decently. It's taking about 6 seconds a minute. So it's still a little slow, but I run it on my local machine. Bottom line is I'm using transcriptions. I'm extracting every bit of text that I can out of the video, basically vectorizing all that. And so I can do a search. But the key for me is I want to feed that into a large language model and tell it to write the first draft of the book. Right? It's like take everything I said and everything that was on the screen and write me that first draft so I could just spend time sort of cleaning it up. I'm praying that this works.
Another, if this idea strikes you as something you want to do, you might want to, instead of having it write a draft, write an outline, right? So if you have a really complete, thorough outline, you have the organization of the book, right? And you have all the facts and information in the, very concisely written in the outline, the sub.
A detailed outline, essentially.
Highly detailed outline.
Yeah, high detail.
And then you can rearrange and sort of tweak it, and you can write the chapters based on the outline. You can do all that stuff. And you're so far along in writing that book, if you just have an outline. Yeah. And then you just go through the first item in the outline, you type it out.
It's basically there. It's just filling.
Yeah. But if you have it right, the problem with having LMs write is they write mediocre copy. Their word choice, all that kind of stuff is kind of an average, and you can tweak that to a certain extent with
it may be more work cleaning up. What you're saying is it may be more work cleaning up the LLMs language choices as opposed to the outline. That's a brilliant idea, Mike. I'm going to start there.
Yeah, and just be very straightforward when you convert the outline to the prose and the paragraphs and all that stuff. You should be very straightforward. Just write it as plain and clean as you can. But it's so much easier to take a single line in an outline and then sort of rewrite it than it is to look at a blank page and be like, oh, I got to write a book. It's a very, very, very different experience, and it's just a matter of going through each thing in order. But again, when it's in outline form, then you can really get the organization. You can move things around. You can really get a handle on what those chapters are going to be like, what the organization is going to be like, what's missing, right? And you can even ask an LLM, what's missing from this? Like what would enhance this? And but once you have a perfect, like a really, really good outline, you're basically done. At that point, it's just typing.
Yeah. I like that idea. I think I'm going to start there. I'm close to being able to do it for 20 hours of video. It's just a matter of walking away from my laptop for, I didn't even want to do the math. It's 6 seconds a minute, but I was like, well, about as fast as I can get it to work on my machine. Because I'm not going to pay for that, dude. That's, that's a lot of tokens.
Yeah.
So as we're kind of completely running out of time here, what are the topics that over the last, say, month or so that have been sort of coming up for you? What have you been sort of focused on as it relates to tech? It doesn't even have to be AI so much. Like if I were to open up your last couple of newsletters, what are you sort of getting excited about and what you're seeing?
Well, I write a lot about, sometimes I like to mark points in time where we've entered a kind of a new era. And I think that one of those points is a little bit of an obvious one, which is that video and photo editing has gotten to the point where, okay, it's a whole new ball game now. It's a nano banana. Google's Gemini Flash 2.5 Flash, I think it's called, Flash Image. The ability to have persistence across different iterations, or to take a photograph and to insert something in that photograph with a prompt and have the thing you inserted not alter the photograph in any way, and also have the same lighting and be very much in context in that photograph. Okay, now we're in a new era where you can't trust anything you see. And so that's a new thing that I talk about. I like to talk about when I feel like some startups make a mistake categorically. I like to go in there and try to bring attention to that mistake. And the biggest mistake, my most recent newsletter is about how so many AI startups are coming out with pendants or pins or necklaces as a thing that people will wear on their body or the clothing, where that will listen to everything, and then they'll have this thing that can be processed with AI later. And I'm telling people, never going to happen. You're never going to have a mainstream device that's a pin that pins on somebody's clothing. Nobody's going to do that. Like, some people will do it, but like, you'll never. Where AI wearables is going is glasses and watches. You can't beat glasses for that, because the speakers next to the ear, the visuals are right over the eyes. If you have a camera on this wearable that's doing multimodal AI, right, where your eyes are looking, where your head is pointed, that's what it's going to be. You can't do better than glasses, but for people who don't want to have glasses, we have watches. Those are acceptable form factors. Nobody's ever going to accept putting a needle through their clothing and have this thing hanging on their clothing. The percentage of people who are ever going to accept that is fewer than 3. So that's a non-starter. It's my message to Silicon Valley. Stop it with the pins and pendants and necklaces. It's never going to happen. So that's so I'm all over the map, but really the way I look at my newsletter is it's what I call cyberpunk nonfiction. So all these themes from late 20th century cyberpunk fiction are now real. Like, we got robots walking around. We have AI that's going mainstream. We have, augmented virtual reality that's reaching a level of development that's really interesting. People, our government, we have people who are on the brink of becoming trillionaires. We have, so our whole world is very, very much like a cyberpunk novel nowadays. And so the implants, the prosthetics, AI-driven prosthetics, the machine-computer interfaces that are being developed at a rapid pace right now. This stuff is just science fiction. Used to be science fiction. Now it's happening. So I like to write about all that kind of stuff. I think it's very interesting. But I like to contextualize what's happening for people so that you can sort of have a big picture about how our world is changing, because it's changing so fast that it's tempting to just throw your hands up and go, "Oh my God, I can't even with the tech news these days." But I like to contextualize.
Are you more excited or more negative or more excited? Because obviously everything could be used for good and bad, but
that's a tough one. Yeah, I think like technology has been for many, many years, it'll make everything a lot better and a lot worse at the same time, and so it's just accelerating to a point. But I think. I would have to say I'm more excited than anything else, because for people who are smart about it, you can kind of choose your adventure, right? Like we were talking about, whether you use AI to make yourself dumber or smarter, it's up to you. You can choose either path, right? Or the opportunities are amazing. If somebody wants to start a business, right? All the AI and things that are happening, there are the multiple trends that have happened over, let's call it, the last 30 years, that make starting an AI based or a hardware based or any kind of small business, any sort of technology thing, great. So like, by yourself, you can use AI to do all the minutia, you get legal advice, to get, to find out about regulatory issues, to break down complex regulatory issues for you. Like, if that bores you to tears, which it does for me, you can just basically point AI at it and say, explain this to me and tell me what I have to do. And even with agentic AI or agentic AI browsers like Comet from Perplexity, you can say, go to this, fill out this form for me, this government website, so that my business can do X, Y, Z. So it's a wonderful time to be alive if you are enterprising and interested and ambitious and want to really make a difference in the world. It's a terrible time to be alive if you just want to cruise through and you have a boring job and really, just go through the motions, kind of a clock in, clock out kind of a job. It's not a good time to be that kind of person. So, but I think that,
outside of the trades, because my son decided, and I'm so happy, decided he wanted to be an electrician. And he's loving it. He's in his second year of education, his third year of apprenticeship. And I think the trades are AI is gonna find its way there, but again, it's gonna be an enhancing situation.
Somebody has to build and fix and modify and optimize and invent the physical world. And so any sort of thing where you're dealing with infrastructure or any of that kind of stuff is probably a great career choice. And so, yeah, that's great. Absolutely.
Yeah, he didn't want to go to college. And neither of my two boys wanted to go to college. He eventually decided, okay, I'll be an electrician, and he's loving it. The 21-year-old is a server in one of my sister's restaurants, and he's making so much money. He's living on his own already, right? But I think his path is going to be managing restaurants at some point. And that type of retail doesn't go away.
People want and need restaurants and things like that. I mean, and you never know where it's going to go. I mean, like take my wife, for example, like the reason her path, you can trace her path, her career path all the way back to she was a cashier, like a teenage cashier in a hotel room service operation, right? Just processing the room service checks, right? Which she parlayed into management, which she parlayed into an expertise around food and beverage and hospitality, which she turned into. Without that, she wouldn't have done the sort of the Silicon Valley fixer job. Without all of that, she was a catering person for a chancellor of a university. She managed the food and beverage operations for multiple high-end hotels in LA and New York, which all of that came to bear on this thing where we live this great lifestyle, and she does these amazing wine and food experiences. And it all started because she, as a teenager, happened to randomly get a job, as a cashier. So you never know where any of this stuff is going to go.
You just got to I keep going back to, you got to get lucky when you're younger to find something that you're passionate about. The moment you find that, you tend to be okay moving forward because you sort of make better choices pursuing that as opposed
and
to.
if you're doing something that you love doing, you've already gotten lucky, right? And so, some people get a lot luckier than others, right? So, if for example, I always tell people, if you want to really succeed in certain things, like let's say you want to really, really have a gigantic following on Instagram, right? Best way to apply your time is to build a time machine and go back in time 15 years. Because if you were really an active user 15 years ago on Instagram, and you keep at it and you love doing it and you're doing whatever, influencing thing you're doing, whatever subject matter you love doing, after 15 years, that's how you get 200 million followers. You're going to start today? No. Build the time machine. But you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen 15 years from now. So that's the point. Like you don't know what thing you're going to do that seems like is just your little pet passion that could turn you into a millionaire. It's like it could turn you into a really famous person.
But I try to tell the kids as much as I can. Success isn't about how much money you have. Their grandfather was a musician. He was a sax player. All he wanted to do was play music. He had a job at Grumman. I think at the top of his working life there, he made $55,000 a year. All of his friends became executive vice presidents. He turned every one of those jobs down because he wanted to be able to go home and get on stage and play his music. And he never spent a night not in a bed in his house after a good meal, right? And so to me, that's success. He made enough money to do the things that he loved to do, and he didn't ever feel like he was lacking anything he wanted, right? So I try to tell these kids all the time, it's not about how much money you make. It's getting a lifestyle that you want, right? And it doesn't have to be complex. It can be as simple as that. And having that your whole life. I almost feel like you've done that too, Mike. Like this is the lifestyle
100%.
we wanted, and we've made that happen. And
yeah,
I've made the money that we needed to make to do that, plus a little bit more as a backup, right? And that's like a beautiful thing.
What I was supposed to do, right, with the career trajectory I had in my 20s and early 30s. So I was rising in the ranks of the editorial world. I was editor-in-chief, I think, how old was I? 32 through 33, something like that, pretty young. Running an editorial organization with 62 employees. What I was supposed to do after that was either go to a bigger publication and be an editor-in-chief at a really bigger, much, Condé Nast type publication, or move into the publisher ranks, become a publishing mogul, doing all this stuff. I'd still be living in New York City. I'd be making a ton of money, right? That's what I was supposed to do. And I sort of like took a step to the side, and I'm like, you know what? I love being an opinion writer in technology. I just want to do that. I don't want to just be a writer. And so you give up an enormous amount of money to do something like that. But I couldn't be happier. I work for myself. I travel the world, and I've got it made, basically. And it's not because I made a ton of money and I have a sailboat and all that kind of stuff. It's because I found a way to live the life that I want to live. And that's why I'm so much happier than the publisher I would have been.
Money, I try to tell the kids this last point. Money isn't happiness, it's convenience.
Yeah.
It's convenience.
I wrote a whole chapter about this in my book. Basically, the reason people want money is because they crave novelty. Now, that doesn't sound intuitive at all, but basically, you want to go to restaurants because it's something new. You want to take a vacation because you want to be in a novel place. You want to go to the movies or go to a Broadway production or whatever because it's something new. We sort of occupy the lives in our minds of the people we read in novels and watch in movies and TV shows because we want to be someone else for a little while. We want to experience the novelty or the newness of all these new things, and it can be expensive. You got a big TV, you want an even bigger TV because it's new, and it's interesting, and all that kind of stuff, and it's expensive. You want a new car, but if you live automatically, everything, the novelty is always built in. Everything is always new all the time. And so it's not, you don't have to spend so much money to get something different in your life. Things are always different if you're moving around.
You're scratching the itch in a different way. But yeah, it's interesting.
Exactly. Right. So you have to understand what the purpose of your career is. What's the purpose of making a lot of money? What do you buy with that money? And why do you buy it, right? So if you follow that all the way down, is it because social status, because you think other people will look at you and be impressed, or do you think it's because we all need? I think it's a good idea for young people like your kids and my kids to like really examine why they do everything and really follow that rabbit hole all the way down. Why am I really doing what I'm doing? And I just think it's a good idea. We live in a world of unbelievable opportunities, and technology is a major driver of those opportunities, and we should take advantage of them.
And I hope any young person listening to the show hears, and I hear this from a lot of guests, right? Just follow your passion, listen to the voice in your head. It's trying to help you really make your life better and do the things you want to do, and your life will end up somewhere pretty positive if you do these things, right? Instead of you taking the track that you were supposed to, Mike, you kept listening to the back. I really want to do this. I really want to do this. And you make that happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now you're living a great life.
Right. And for young people, I've always told my kids and stuff like that, not only follow your passion, but don't break the law. Don't become an addict in any way. Right? And live within your means. That's it. Live below your means, right? So you'll come out ahead no matter what if you do those 4 things.
Yeah. Same lessons for my kids. They all have Edward Jones accounts. I push them to put money in it every month, right? And you're young, you do this for the next 20 years. You never have to worry about. My kid was able to buy a house. I didn't have to put my hand in my pocket because of these things, right? So you're right. But what's funny? We're so out of time, but I didn't get these lessons from my parents. My parents didn't really understand how to manage money.
I had to figure it out.
I had to make all these mistakes.
Exactly. Yep, me too.
Yeah, we want the kids doing it. Anyway, dude, we are so out of time, dude, and I know we could talk for another hour.
Yeah.
All right. So, Mike, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, and we'll put it in the show notes, in touch with you after listening to this, what's the best way?
Well, you can email me. I love email. Mike at Elgan, ELGAN.com is a great way to do it. And my newsletter is machinesociety.ai, and my contact information is there. So that's it. I'm on all the social networks. I just use my full name on all of them. So like I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on all of them. Basically, Mastodon, it goes on and on. Mike.Elgan or Mike Elgan on all of them. So please follow me on whatever social networks you like, and please, I would encourage people to give my newsletter a try, because I think it's a lot of fun, and it's free unless you want to upgrade to the paid version, but the free version is good, and that's how. And I really want to thank you for having me on. This is a great podcast. I really enjoy it, and it's even more enjoyable to be on it.
No, I appreciate you. Appreciate you being on, Mike. I love talking to, especially people like you that have this really amazing story and career. And I'm excited to even get on the newsletter, because you can't get enough news today on what's happening. If you can get ahead of anybody on the news and make better decisions, it's huge. So I'm really excited.
Well, thank you.
All right. This is Mike Elgan and Bill Kennedy signing off from the Ardan Labs podcast. We hope to see everybody again real soon.